The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the highway as Ray finished another grueling 12-hour shift at the construction site. His shoulders ached from hauling materials all day, and all he wanted was to get home, shower off the dust and grime, and collapse on the couch. Maybe his wife would have made that chicken stew he loved. The thought made him press the gas pedal a little harder, his old pickup truck rumbling as it picked up speed. It had been a tough week. The foreman was pushing everyone to finish before the rain forecasted for the weekend, and Ray had been pulling extra hours to make sure they met the deadline. The overtime pay would help with the bills this month, especially with his daughter's school trip coming up. She'd been talking about the Science Museum for weeks, her eyes lighting up whenever she mentioned the dinosaur exhibit. Ray smiled at the thought and turned up the radio, tapping his calloused fingers against the steering wheel. The classic rock station was playing one of his favorites, and he hummed along, feeling the tension in his neck start to ease. The highway was mostly empty at this hour, caught in that lull between the end of rush hour and the evening traffic. He barely noticed when he drifted slightly over the speed limit, his mind already at home. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror jolted him back to reality. Ray muttered under his breath and eased the truck onto the shoulder, checking his speedometer. Only 7 miles over the limit. Usually cops didn't bother with such a minor infraction. Ray reached for his wallet, pulling out his license. He'd been through this routine before. Be polite, keep your hands visible, don't make any sudden movements. Simple rules that his father had taught him years ago. The police cruiser parked behind him, lights still flashing. Ray watched in the mirror as a stocky officer stepped out, adjusting his belt before approaching. Ray rolled down his window and put both hands on the steering wheel, his license and registration ready on the dashboard. License and registration, the officer demanded without preamble. His nameplate read Morales. His face was set in a hard frown, and he seemed wound tight like a spring ready to snap. Yes, sir. Right here, Ray said, gesturing to the documents on the dash. Do you want me to hand them to you? Officer Morales nodded curtly, and Ray carefully picked up the items, passing them through the window. The officer snatched them from his hand. Do you know why I pulled you over? Morales asked, his tone suggesting that Ray should definitely know. I think I might have been a bit over the speed limit, sir. I apologize for that. Long day at work, and I was just eager to get home. The officer's eyes narrowed as he studied Ray's license. Construction worker, huh? Yes, sir. 12 years now. Officer Morales made a sound that was almost a scoff. You people always think the rules don't apply once you're off the job site. Ray felt a familiar twinge in his chest, that mixture of confusion, anger, and resignation. You people? He asked quietly. Blue-collar workers? Officer Morales clarified, though his tone suggested he might have meant something else entirely. Always in a rush, thinking speed limits are just suggestions. Ray took a slow breath. I wasn't trying to break any laws, sir. It was an honest mistake. Step out of the vehicle, Morales ordered suddenly. Ray blinked in surprise. Sir, is there a problem with my license? I said step out of the vehicle, now. The officer's hand moved to rest on his holster, not drawing his weapon, but making it clear that it was there. Ray's heart pounded as he slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. Yes, sir, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He opened the door carefully and stepped onto the gravel shoulder. Turn around, hands on the truck, Morales instructed. Ray complied, placing his palms flat against the warm metal of his truck. This was definitely not standard procedure for going 7 miles over the speed limit. He could hear Officer Morales talking into his radio behind him, but couldn't make out the words over the sound of passing cars. Any weapons or contraband in the vehicle I should know about? The officer asked, coming closer. No, sir. Nothing like that. Mind if I take a look? Ray knew his rights. He knew he could refuse without probable cause, but he also knew that standing up for those rights could escalate the situation. I'd rather you didn't, sir. I'm just trying to get home to my family. Officer Morales stepped closer, his breath hot on Ray's neck. Got something to hide? No, sir. Just been a long day, and I'd like to get home if possible. The officer was silent for a moment, and Ray could feel himself being sized up. Finally, Morales stepped back. Wait here. Ray stayed perfectly still as the officer returned to his cruiser with Ray's license and registration. Through the side mirror, he could see Morales typing on his computer. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching Ray's nerves thinner. A truck roared past, the wind of its passing tugging at Ray's clothes. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to calm the anger building inside him. This wasn't fair. He knew it wasn't fair, but fairness didn't always factor into these situations. After what felt like an eternity, Officer Morales returned, holding a ticket book along with Ray's documents. "Your record's clean," he said, sounding almost disappointed. "But I'm still writing you up for speeding and for a cracked taillight." Ray frowned. "Cracked taillight? I checked all my lights last weekend. They were fine." "Well, your right one's cracked now," Morales said with a shrug. "You might want to get that fixed before another officer notices it." Ray bit the inside of his cheek to keep from arguing. He had the distinct feeling that if he went to check the taillight right now, he'd find it mysteriously broken. Officer Morales scribbled in his ticket book, then tore off the citation and handed it to Ray along with his license and registration. "Sign at the bottom," he instructed, offering a pen. Ray glanced at the ticket and felt his stomach drop. The fine was over $300, money that was supposed to go toward his daughter's school trip. "This seems excessive for 7 miles over," he said carefully. "The taillight adds to it." Morales replied flatly, "You can contest it in court if you think it's unfair. Sign the ticket." With a heavy sigh, Ray scrawled his signature at the bottom of the form. As he handed the pen back, he made brief eye contact with the officer. There was something there, not quite hatred, but a cold indifference that was somehow worse. "Can I get back in my truck now?" Ray asked. Officer Morales nodded once. "Drive carefully," he said, in a tone that made it sound like a threat rather than concern. Ray climbed back into his pickup, his hands shaking slightly as he put the key in the ignition. He watched in the mirror as Morales walked back to his cruiser, his stride confident, almost smug. The police lights switched off, but the cruiser remained parked on the shoulder. Ray pulled carefully back onto the highway, making sure to drive exactly at the speed limit. His mind raced with things he wished he'd said, arguments he could have made, but he knew none of them would have helped. If anything, they might have made the situation worse. The police cruiser followed him for the next mile before finally turning off at an exit. Only then did Ray let out the breath he'd been holding. He glanced at the ticket lying on the passenger seat and felt a wave of helpless anger wash over him. He'd have to explain to his wife why they needed to dip into their savings. He'd have to tell his daughter that maybe they wouldn't be able to afford the special dinosaur toy she wanted from the museum gift shop, all because an officer decided to make an example of him for no good reason. Ray pulled into a gas station just off the highway, needing a moment to collect himself before heading home. He didn't want his family to see him this upset. He parked near the convenience store entrance and rested his forehead against the steering wheel, taking deep breaths. After a few minutes, he reached for his phone and called his wife. She answered on the second ring, her voice instantly soothing his frayed nerves. "Hey, you on your way home?" she asked. "I made that stew you like." Despite everything, Ray smiled. "Yeah, I'm on my way. Just stop for a minute." He paused, then added, "Got pulled over." "What? Why, you're always so careful." Ray sighed, barely over the speed limit. "But the cop, he had it out for me from the start. Wrote me up for that, and a taillight I'm pretty sure wasn't broken until he got there." "Oh no," she said, understanding immediately. "How bad is the ticket?" $300, Ray replied, the number still stinging. "There goes the dinosaur toy." "We'll figure it out," she assured him, though he could hear the worry in her voice. "Maybe we can contest it. If the taillight wasn't actually broken—" "It's not worth it," Ray interrupted gently. "Taking time off work for court would cost almost as much as the ticket." They talked for a few more minutes, his wife's voice gradually calming him down. By the time he hung up, Ray felt steady enough to drive the rest of the way home. He was about to start the engine when he noticed a police cruiser pull into the gas station. Ray froze. It was the same cruiser with Officer Morales at the wheel. The officer parked on the other side of the lot and got out, not noticing Ray's truck among the several vehicles at the station. Morales looked tired as he walked toward the convenience store, rubbing the back of his neck. Ray slumped down in his seat, not wanting another confrontation. Through the windshield, he watched as Officer Morales entered the store, the bell above the door jingling as it closed behind him. For a moment, Ray considered leaving before the officer came back out, but something made him wait. Maybe it was curiosity about what had made Morales so hostile. Maybe it was just the human instinct to know more about someone who had wronged you. Whatever it was, Ray found himself watching the store entrance, wondering what would happen next when their paths crossed again. Ray watched Officer Morales through the convenience store window, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Just 15 minutes ago, this man had humiliated him roadside, written him an unfair ticket, and possibly damaged his truck. Now here he was, just a tired-looking guy buying coffee, completely unaware that Ray was watching him. From this angle, Morales looked different. Without the authority of his position looming between them, Ray could see the dark circles under the officer's eyes and the slight slump in his shoulders. He moved with less confidence than he had shown during their encounter on the highway. Here, among the chips and soda fridges, he was just another person trying to make it through their day. Ray debated what to do. Part of him wanted to confront the officer, to walk right up and ask why he'd been treated so unfairly. Another part wanted to hide until Morales left. The anger that had been simmering since the traffic stop still bubbled beneath the surface. But seeing the officer in this ordinary setting had taken some of the edge off. Inside the store, Morales poured himself a large coffee and added what looked like too much sugar. He grabbed a packaged sandwich from the refrigerated section and approached the counter. Ray could see him exchanging a few words with the cashier. Nothing animated, just the polite minimum required for the transaction. Ray's phone buzzed. His wife had texted, "Everything okay?" "Stew's getting cold," he texted back quickly. "Be home soon. Just need a minute." When he looked up again, Morales was paying for his purchases. The officer's movements seemed mechanical, like someone going through the motions. As he waited for his change, Morales rubbed his eyes with his free hand and rolled his neck, clearly trying to work out some tension. Ray wondered what had made Morales so aggressive during their encounter. Was he always like that, or had something happened earlier in his shift? It didn't excuse the unfair treatment, but Ray couldn't help being curious about what drove someone to act that way. The bell above the door jingled as Morales exited the store with his coffee and sandwich. Ray slumped lower in his seat, not wanting to be seen. Through his windshield, he watched as the officer walked back toward his cruiser. Something about his gait seemed off, a little unsteady, like a man who'd been on his feet too long. Ray's phone buzzed again. This time it was his daughter. "Dad, when are you coming home? Mom let me stay up late to see you." A smile tugged at Ray's lips despite everything. He replied with a quick, "On my way, dinosaur girl," their inside joke from her current obsession with paleontology. He looked up from his phone just in time to see Officer Morales stop abruptly halfway to his cruiser. The coffee cup slipped from the officer's hand, splashing brown liquid across the asphalt. Morales reached for the hood of a parked car to steady himself, his other hand moving to his chest. Ray sat up straighter, his earlier anger forgotten, as he watched the officer's face contort in pain. Morales tried to take another step but stumbled, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. He fumbled for something on his belt, probably his radio. But his movements were uncoordinated, almost desperate. Time seemed to slow down as Ray watched the officer sink to his knees beside the parked car, the sandwich falling forgotten to the ground. Morales clutched his chest, his mouth open in what might have been a cry for help, but no sound carried across the parking lot. Ray didn't remember opening his truck door or crossing the parking lot. One moment he was watching the scene unfold, and the next he was kneeling beside Officer Morales, who had now collapsed fully onto the asphalt. "Officer."
"Can you hear me?"
Ray asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Morales' eyes were open but unfocused, his breathing rapid and shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "My chest," the officer managed to gasp. Can't breathe. Ray had seen this before. 3 years ago, a co-worker had shown the same symptoms minutes before going into cardiac arrest. The construction company had put everyone through first aid training after that incident. Training that had seemed tedious at the time but now rushed back to Ray with perfect clarity. "I think you're having a heart attack," Ray said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm going to help you, but I need to get you into a better position." He glanced around quickly. No one else was in the parking lot, and the cashier inside was occupied with another customer, unaware of the drama unfolding outside. Ray gently but firmly rolled Morales onto his back. The officer tried to resist at first, confusion evident in his eyes. "You, from before," Morales mumbled. recognition dawning on his pain-contorted face. "Don't talk," Ray instructed, loosening Morales' collar and checking his pulse. It was rapid and irregular. "Save your strength. I'm going to get help." Ray pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered almost immediately, and Ray explained the situation in clear, concise terms, providing their location and describing Morales' symptoms. Years of reporting incidents on construction sites had taught him how to communicate effectively in emergencies. "An ambulance is on the way," the dispatcher assured him. "Estimated arrival time is 7 minutes. Can you stay with him?" "Yes," Ray replied without hesitation. "I've had first aid training. What else should I do while we wait? Does he have any medication on him? Nitroglycerin tablets or aspirin?" Ray didn't know, but he remembered the officer reaching for his belt earlier. "Let me check." He quickly explained to Morales what he needed to do, then carefully searched the officer's pockets and utility belt. In a small pouch, he found a prescription bottle labeled nitroglycerin. "Found nitroglycerin tablets," Ray told the dispatcher. Under the dispatcher's guidance, Ray helped Morales take one of the tablets, placing it under the officer's tongue. Throughout this process, Ray kept talking to Morales, trying to keep him conscious and calm. "Help is coming," Ray assured him. "Just focus on breathing. Nice and slow." Morales' eyes remained fixed on Ray's face, confusion and pain mingling in his expression. "Why, are you helping me?" he managed to ask between labored breaths. The question caught Ray off guard. Why was he helping? This man had harassed him, had been unfair and cruel for no reason. The ticket Morales had written would mean Ray's daughter couldn't get the toy she wanted. By all accounts, Ray should have been glad to see him suffering, but that thought hadn't even crossed his mind when he saw Morales collapse. "Because you need help," Ray said simply. "The rest doesn't matter right now." A thin sheen of tears appeared in the officer's eyes. Whether from pain or emotion, Ray couldn't tell. Morales tried to speak again, but winced as another wave of pain washed over him. "Don't try to talk," Ray said. "The ambulance will be here soon. Just hang on." Inside the store, the cashier had finally noticed the scene in the parking lot. She rushed out, eyes wide with alarm. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice high with panic. "Is that a police officer?" "He's having a heart attack," Ray explained. "I've called an ambulance. Can you go to the road and flag them down when they arrive? Make sure they know exactly where we are." The cashier nodded and hurried toward the entrance of the gas station, grateful to have a specific task. Ray turned his attention back to Morales, whose breathing seemed to be getting more labored by the minute. The officer's eyes were beginning to lose focus, and his skin had taken on a bluish tinge. "Stay with me," Ray urged, checking Morales' pulse again. It felt weaker than before. "Talk to me. Tell me about your day before you pulled me over." It was a technique Ray had learned in his first aid training. Keep the patient talking, keep them engaged. Morales didn't respond verbally, but his eyes flickered back to Ray's face, showing he was still conscious. "I bet you've had a long shift," Ray continued, keeping his voice steady and conversational despite the gravity of the situation. "Mine was 12 hours today. Construction work never seems to end, especially when the weather's about to turn." Morales managed a small nod. His hand, which had been clutching his chest, now moved slightly toward Ray. Without thinking, Ray took it, offering whatever comfort he could in this strange, intense moment. "I've got kids waiting at home," Ray said, still talking to keep Morales engaged. "One's crazy about dinosaurs right now. Won't stop talking about them." "Do you have kids?" Morales' lips moved, forming what might have been a yes, though no sound came out. In the distance, the wail of sirens became audible, growing louder by the second. Relief washed over Ray. "Help was almost here, hear that?" Ray said, squeezing Morales' hand. "Ambulance is coming. You're going to be okay." The officer's eyes had drifted closed, but he was still breathing. Ray continued talking, saying whatever came to mind, just to create a human connection that might help anchor Morales to consciousness. The sirens grew louder, and soon flashing lights illuminated the darkening parking lot. The cashier was waving frantically at the entrance, directing the ambulance to their location. As the emergency vehicle pulled up beside them, Ray felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that professional help had arrived, concern for a man who just an hour ago he had resented, and a strange sense of connection formed in crisis. The paramedics jumped out, equipment in hand. One of them knelt beside Ray. "What's the situation?" he asked briskly. "Possible heart attack," Ray replied. He collapsed about 10 minutes ago. I gave him one nitroglycerin tablet from his prescription. His pulse is getting weaker and he's losing consciousness. The paramedic looked impressed by Ray's precise report. Good job. We've got him now. Ray reluctantly let go of Morales' hand and stepped back, allowing the medical professionals to take over. As they worked, one of them glanced at Ray. You know him? The paramedic asked. Ray hesitated, unsure how to answer. We met earlier today, he said finally. As the paramedics loaded Morales onto a stretcher, the officer's eyes flickered open briefly. His gaze found Ray, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, perhaps of how quickly life could change, of how thin the line was between power and vulnerability. Then the ambulance doors closed, and Officer Morales was gone, whisked away toward the hospital, his life hanging in the balance. Ray stood alone in the parking lot, the forgotten coffee still pooled on the asphalt at his feet. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his family wondering where he was. But for a moment he couldn't move, still processing what had just happened. The ticket that had seemed so important earlier now felt trivial. The anger that had burned in his chest had been replaced by something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but perspective. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had just helped save the life of a man who had mistreated him, the same hands that would soon hug his daughter and hold his wife. Life was strange that way, throwing people together in unexpected moments that revealed what truly mattered. The drive home felt surreal. Ray's hand still tingled slightly where he had checked Officer Morales' pulse, and the echo of the ambulance sirens lingered in his ears. The events at the gas station played on loop in his mind. The coffee spilling, Morales collapsing, the look in the officer's eyes when he recognized Ray. The ticket still lay on the passenger seat, but Ray couldn't bring himself to feel angry about it anymore. Not after watching the same man who had written it struggle for breath on the cold asphalt. When Ray finally pulled into his driveway, the porch light was on, casting a warm glow against the gathering darkness. His small weathered house had never looked more inviting. He sat in the truck for a moment, gathering his thoughts before heading inside. The smell of chicken stew greeted him as he opened the front door. His wife appeared from the kitchen, relief washing over her face. There you are. I was starting to worry. She approached for a hug, then stopped, noticing something in his expression. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Before Ray could answer, the patter of small feet announced his daughter's arrival. She barreled into his legs, wrapping her arms around his knees. Daddy! You're super late. I stayed up special and Mom said I could because tomorrow's Saturday, and I wanted to tell you about the new dinosaur fact I learned and... She paused, looking up at him with sudden concern. Are you okay? Your face is doing the serious thing. Ray managed a smile and scooped her up, hugging her tightly. I'm okay, dinosaur girl. Just had a really strange evening. Stranger than when they discovered that dinosaurs had feathers? She asked, her eyes wide. Even stranger than that, Ray confirmed, carrying her to the living room where he collapsed onto the couch, still holding her. His wife followed, her brow furrowed with concern. What happened? Was it about the ticket? Ray nodded slowly. Kind of. It's got complicated. He set his daughter down beside him and took a deep breath. Then he told them everything. The unfair traffic stop, the excessive ticket stopping at the gas station, and then the shocking turn of events when Officer Morales collapsed. His wife's expression shifted from anger about the ticket to astonishment as the story unfolded. So you helped him? After how he treated you? I didn't really think about it, Ray admitted. I just saw someone in trouble and reacted. Like a superhero, his daughter whispered, her eyes shining with admiration. Ray smiled and ruffled her hair. Not exactly. I just did what anyone would do. Not everyone, his wife said quietly. Some people would have walked away. The thought had never occurred to Ray, and the suggestion made him uncomfortable. I couldn't have done that, he said firmly. His wife studied him for a moment, then leaned over to kiss his cheek. I know, that's why I love you. She stood up, smoothing her apron. Now how about some of that stew? You must be starving. Ray nodded gratefully. The events of the evening had pushed hunger aside, but now that she mentioned it, he realized he was famished. As his wife disappeared into the kitchen, his daughter snuggled up next to him. Did the policeman die? She asked in the blunt way only children can manage. No, honey. The ambulance came to take him to the hospital. The doctors will help him get better. Good, she said with a decisive nod. Even if he was mean to you? Ray hugged her close, struck by the simple wisdom of her words. That's right, even if he was mean. After dinner, once his daughter was finally tucked into bed, after extracting a promise that Ray would tell her more about the superhero rescue in the morning, Ray sat at the kitchen table with his wife. The events of the day had left him drained but somehow too wired to sleep. What happens now? His wife asked, stirring her tea thoughtfully. Ray shrugged. Nothing, I guess. I don't even know if he'll be okay. You could call the hospital, she suggested, just to find out how he's doing. Ray considered this. Part of him wanted to know, but another part felt like he should just leave it behind him. A strange intersection of lives that had served its purpose and was now complete. Before he could decide, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, with the local area code. Ray answered cautiously. Hello? Is this Raymond Thompson? A woman's voice asked. Yes, it is. Mr. Thompson, this is Nurse Chen from Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about Officer Luis Morales. Ray straightened in his chair, his heart suddenly pounding. Is he okay? He's stable, the nurse replied. The paramedics told us you were the one who helped him at the scene. You administered his nitroglycerin and called the ambulance. That's right, Ray confirmed, unsure where this was going. The doctor wanted me to tell you that your quick action likely saved his life. Another few minutes without intervention and the damage might have been irreversible. Ray sat in stunned silence, processing this information. His wife reached across the table and squeezed his hand, having heard enough of the conversation to understand. Mr. Thompson, are you there? The nurse asked. Yes, sorry. I'm just surprised you called. Officer Morales regained consciousness about an hour ago. He asked us to contact you. He was quite insistent, actually. Ray exchanged a glance with his wife, who raised her eyebrows in question. He wanted to talk to me? He said to tell you thank you, and that he would like to speak with you when he's feeling stronger. He asked if you might consider visiting tomorrow. The request caught Ray completely off guard. He had assumed their strange connection was over. A brief moment of humanity in crisis that would fade back into the anonymity of everyday life. I don't know, he stammered. You don't have to decide now, the nurse assured him. I can give you the visiting hours and his room number, and you can think about it. After jotting down the information and thanking the nurse, Ray hung up and stared at his phone in disbelief. He wants to see you? His wife asked, her voice gentle. Ray nodded slowly. Apparently. Are you going to go? It was a good question. Ray wasn't sure how to feel about seeing Officer Morales again. What would they even say to each other? Their only interactions had been a tense traffic stop and a medical emergency. Hardly the foundation for a normal conversation. I don't know, he admitted. What do you think I should do? His wife considered this for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. I think you should go, she said finally. Not for him, but for you. For me? You need to close this circle, she explained. Otherwise, you'll always wonder. Ray knew she was right. Despite the exhaustion of the day, he doubted he would sleep well with this hanging over him. Will you come with me? He asked. She smiled and took his hand. Of course. The next morning, after explaining to his disappointed daughter that no, she couldn't skip her swimming lesson to visit Daddy's police friend at the hospital, Ray and his wife made the drive to Memorial. The hospital loomed large and imposing against the clear blue sky, its windows reflecting the sunlight like hundreds of mirrors. Ray's stomach knotted with anxiety as they parked. He still wasn't sure what he would say to Officer Morales. Glad you didn't die seemed insufficient, but anything more felt strangely intimate given their history. The hospital corridors were a maze of squeaking floors and antiseptic smells. Ray held his wife's hand tightly as they followed the directions to the cardiac care unit. At the nurse's station, they were directed to room 312. He's had a good night, the nurse told them with a smile. Much better than we expected. Ray hesitated outside the door, suddenly unsure. His wife gave his hand an encouraging squeeze. You don't have to stay long, she whispered. Just hear what he has to say. Taking a deep breath, Ray knocked softly on the door. Come in, called a voice that Ray recognized, though it sounded weaker than it had on the highway. The room was like any hospital room, clinical, sparse, dominated by the bed and monitoring equipment. Officer Morales looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in the hospital gown with tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. His usual authority had been stripped away by illness, leaving behind just a man, tired, pale, but very much alive. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Ray. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse. Ray nodded, awkwardly hovering near the door. "The nurse called. Said you wanted to see me." Morales gestured weakly to the chair beside his bed. "Please sit." After a moment's hesitation, Ray moved to the chair. His wife hung back by the door, giving them space. "The doctors told me what you did," Morales said, his eyes never leaving Ray's face. "They said if you hadn't been there." He trailed off, the implication clear. Ray shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No." Morales shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Not anyone. Especially not someone I treated the way I treated you." He paused, gathering strength. "I need to apologize. What I did, there's no excuse for it." The directness of the apology caught Ray off guard. He had expected evasion, perhaps some minimal acknowledgement, but not this blunt admission. "I was having a bad day," Morales continued. "My wife. We're separating. I found out yesterday morning. I took it out on you, and that was wrong." Ray didn't know how to respond. The explanation didn't justify the treatment, but the honesty of it demanded some acknowledgement. "I'm sorry about your marriage," he said finally. Morales gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you. But that's no excuse. I abused my position. I was cruel to you for no reason." He took a labored breath. "The ticket, it's been voided. I called my sergeant this morning." Ray blinked in surprise. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Morales insisted. "It's the least I could do after you saved my life." The words hung in the air between them, weighty with implication. Ray hadn't thought of it in those terms, saving a life. He'd just reacted instinctively to someone in distress. "The doctors say it was a major heart attack," Morales added. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't known what to do." He closed his eyes briefly. "My kids would have lost their father." The mention of children shifted something in Ray's perspective. He thought of his own daughter, how devastated she would be to lose him. Whatever Officer Morales had done, his children were innocent. "How many kids do you have?" Ray asked, genuinely curious now. "2 boys, 8 and 10. My daughter's 7, Ray offered. "Crazy about dinosaurs." A ghost of a smile crossed Morales's tired face. "My youngest is into sharks. Every fact, every species. He knows them all." The conversation shifted then, moving into the safer territory of children and their passions. The initial tension began to ease, replaced by the cautious beginnings of understanding. Eventually, a nurse appeared to check Morales's vitals, reminding them that the patient needed rest. Ray stood to leave, surprised to realize they'd been talking for almost half an hour. "Thank you for coming," Morales said as Ray turned to go. "And thank you for what you did." "I won't forget it." Ray nodded, unsure how to respond. This wasn't forgiveness exactly. The situation was too complex for such a simple resolution. But it was something. A recognition of shared humanity that transcended one bad interaction. As he and his wife walked back to their car, Ray felt lighter somehow. The world hadn't changed. There were still unfair traffic stops, still people abusing power, still all the everyday injustices that plagued society. But for this one moment, in this one instance, something different had happened. And maybe, Ray thought as they drove home beneath the bright autumn sky, maybe that was enough. The drive home from the hospital was quiet, both Ray and his wife lost in their own thoughts. The autumn leaves danced across the road, red and gold against the gray pavement. It had been 3 days since the incident at the gas station, but it felt like much longer. "You okay?" his wife finally asked, breaking the silence as they turned onto their street. Ray nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking. About Officer Morales. About everything." Ray sighed, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "It's strange how life works sometimes. If he hadn't pulled me over, if I hadn't stopped at that particular gas station." His wife reached over and squeezed his hand. "But you did, and he's alive because of it." The weight of that reality still hadn't fully settled on Ray. He had gone from resenting this man to literally keeping him alive in the span of an hour. Now they had shared something profound, a moment where all the usual barriers between people had fallen away, leaving only the raw humanity beneath. "His kids," Ray said suddenly. "He has 2 boys. If I hadn't been there, his wife nodded, understanding immediately. I know, it's a lot to process. When they pulled into their driveway, their daughter was waiting on the porch with the neighbor who had been watching her. She bounced down the steps as soon as the car stopped, full of questions about the superhero rescue and the police guy and whether he was feeling better. He's getting better, Ray assured her, lifting her up for a hug. The doctors are taking good care of him. Did you tell him I think it's cool that he fights bad guys like a superhero too? She asked, her eyes wide with the innocent admiration children have for uniforms and badges. Ray hesitated, not wanting to shatter her simple view of the world just yet. I did. He was very happy to hear that. Life returned to normal over the next few weeks, or almost normal. Ray went back to work at the construction site. His daughter continued her dinosaur obsession, and his wife took on extra shifts at the medical billing office where she worked. But something had shifted subtly in Ray's perception of the world. He found himself more patient with rude customers at the coffee shop, more willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. The memory of Officer Morales, strong and authoritative one moment, vulnerable and dying the next, had reminded him how quickly circumstances could change, how thin the veneer of control really was. Ray had no expectation of seeing the officer again. Their brief connection, forged in crisis and tentatively explored in that hospital room, seemed complete, a chapter closed, a lesson learned, which was why he was so surprised when, nearly 3 weeks after the incident, he looked up from pouring concrete to see Officer Morales standing at the edge of the construction site. The officer wasn't in uniform. Instead, he wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt that hung a bit loosely on his frame. He had lost weight during his recovery, his face thinner, but his color was better than it had been in the hospital. He stood somewhat uncertainly, hands in his pockets, watching the construction crew work. Ray's coworker nudged him. "Someone here to see you?" Ray nodded, setting down his tools. "Take over for a minute?" He made his way across the site, removing his hard hat as he approached. Morales straightened when he saw Ray coming, an unreadable expression crossing his face. "Officer," Ray greeted him, unsure what else to say. "Luis," the man corrected him. "I'm not on duty." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I hope you don't mind me showing up like this. I asked around, found out where you worked." Ray shook his head. "It's fine. Just surprised to see you up and about so soon." Luis gave a small, wry smile. "Doctor's orders. Short walks, light activity. Getting stronger every day." He hesitated, then added, "Thanks to you." The awkwardness between them was palpable. Two men from different worlds, connected by extraordinary circumstances but unsure how to navigate ordinary interaction. "How did you find me?" Ray asked, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Police resources," Luis admitted, then hastily added, "Nothing invasive. Just looked up your address from when I pulled you over. Asked a neighbor which construction company you worked for." Ray nodded, wondering where this was going. "So, you're feeling better?" "Getting there. Doctor says I was lucky. The blockage was severe, but they caught it in time. Minimal heart damage." Luis looked down at his feet, then back at Ray, his expression serious. "Look, I didn't just come to update you on my health, no? Luis took a deep breath. "Remember I told you about my boys? 8 and 10? Ray nodded. "My oldest, he's got a school project. Community heroes, they're calling it. Each kid has to interview someone who did something brave." Luis looked uncomfortable but pressed on. "He wanted to interview a firefighter or someone like that, but when I told him what happened with you, he wants to interview you instead." The request caught Ray completely off guard. "Me, I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone would do." Luis shook his head firmly. "Not anyone. That's what I've been thinking about these past weeks. I've been a cop for 12 years. I've seen how people react in emergencies. Most freeze. Some run away. Very few step up like you did." He paused. "Especially not for someone who had treated them the way I treated you." Ray didn't know how to respond to that. He glanced back at his coworkers, who were trying very hard to look like they weren't watching this unusual interaction. "I don't know what to say," Ray admitted. "You can say no," Luis assured him quickly. "I know it's asking a lot considering our history, but my boy, he was really impressed when I told him what happened. It would mean a lot to him. To both of us." Ray thought about his own daughter, how excited she got about her school projects, how devastated she would have been to lose her father, and he thought about Luis's sons who had come so close to that reality. When would this interview be? he asked finally. The relief on Luis's face was immediate. This Saturday? Maybe you could come over for lunch? Bring your family too, your wife and your daughter. My boys would love to meet them. The invitation seemed to surprise Luis himself, as if he hadn't planned to extend it but found himself doing so anyway. Ray considered it for a moment. Part of him still felt the sting of that unfair traffic stop, the humiliation and helplessness of being treated with contempt. But that memory was fading, overshadowed by what had come after, the life-or-death moment in the gas station parking lot, the conversation in the hospital room, and now this unexpected olive branch. Let me check with my wife, Ray said. But, yeah, I think we could do that. Luis smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face from its usual stern expression into something warmer, more approachable. Thank you. I appreciate it. They exchanged phone numbers, Luis promising to text his address. As the officer turned to leave, he paused. One more thing, he said. I've been thinking a lot about what happened on the highway, about how I behaved. Ray tensed slightly, not sure he wanted to revisit that moment. I've requested a transfer to community outreach, Luis continued, starting once I'm cleared for full duty. I want to do better. Be better. He met Ray's eyes directly. You showed me something important that day, something I needed to see. With that, he nodded a goodbye and walked back toward the parking area, leaving Ray standing there, cement dust on his boots, trying to process this unexpected development. When Saturday arrived, Ray found himself pulling up in front of a modest single-story house on the other side of town. His wife sat beside him in the passenger seat, and his daughter bounced excitedly in the back, clutching a dinosaur book she had insisted on bringing to show Luis's sons. You sure about this? His wife asked quietly as they sat in the car, the engine off but neither of them moving to get out yet. Ray looked at the house, with its neatly mowed lawn and basketball hoop over the garage. Through the front window he could see movement, someone passing by living their life unaware of being watched. No, he admitted. But I think it's important. For all of us, his wife nodded and squeezed his hand. You're a good man, Ray Thompson. The door opened before they reached it. Luis stood there looking almost unfamiliar in casual clothes, jeans and a faded university sweatshirt. Behind him peeked two boys, one taller with Luis's serious eyes, the other smaller with a splash of freckles across his nose. You came, Luis said, relief evident in his voice. Ray nodded, suddenly feeling awkward again. We came. There was a moment of hesitation, neither man quite sure of the protocol for this unusual situation. Then Luis stepped forward, hand extended. Welcome to our home, he said formally, then broke into a smile. We've got tacos. Ray's daughter perked up at this. Tacos are my favorite. After dinosaurs. The ice was broken. Luis's younger son immediately asked about dinosaurs, and within minutes, the two children were sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, poring over the dinosaur book while the older boy set up his interview equipment, a tablet with a recording app and a notebook filled with carefully written questions. The adults moved to the kitchen, where Luis's mother was putting final touches on the meal. She hugged Ray's wife warmly and insisted on feeding everyone immediately. As they sat around the table, passing dishes and helping the children with their food, Ray was struck by the surreal quality of the moment. 3 weeks ago, he had been seething with resentment toward the man now offering him homemade salsa. Life was strange that way, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, but also capable of surprising kindness. When the older boy finally conducted his interview, his questions were thoughtful and surprisingly mature. Were you scared? He asked. How did you know what to do? Do you think anyone can be a hero? Ray answered honestly, explaining that he hadn't thought about being scared or brave. He'd just reacted. That sometimes doing the right thing wasn't a choice you made, but a reflex that came from somewhere deep inside. As he spoke, he caught Luis watching him, an unreadable expression on his face. Not quite gratitude, not quite admiration, but something complex that acknowledged the unusual bond they now shared. When the day ended and goodbyes were said, Ray found himself standing again on the front porch with Luis. Thank you, the officer said simply. For today. For everything. Ray nodded. Your boys are great kids. They are. Luis hesitated, then added, maybe we could do this again sometime? Not for a school project, just as friends. The word friends hung in the air between them, tentative, questioning, unexpected. Ray thought about the unfairness of life, about grudges and second chances, about the thin line between enemy and ally. He thought about his daughter playing happily with Luis's sons, completely unaware of the complicated history between their fathers. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think I'd like that." As they drove home under the setting sun, his daughter already half asleep in the back seat, Ray realized that the anger he had carried from that day on the highway was finally gone. Not forgotten, but transformed into something else. Something that looked a lot like understanding. 6 months passed. Winter had come and gone, leaving behind a vibrant spring that painted the city in shades of green and pink as cherry blossoms bloomed along the streets. Life had settled into new patterns for both Ray and Luis. They weren't close friends. Their lives were too different for that. But they had developed a relationship that defied easy categorization. Every few weeks, their families would get together for dinner or a weekend barbecue. Their children had formed fast friendships, the kind only kids can make, unburdened by the complicated history between their fathers. Ray was packing his lunch for work when his phone buzzed with a text from Luis. "Big day today. Nervous as hell." Ray smiled, remembering their conversation from last week. Today was Luis's first official day with the community outreach unit. After months of recovery, desk duty, and specialized training, he was finally starting the role he had requested after his heart attack. "You'll do great," Ray texted back. "Remember what we talked about?" His wife glanced over his shoulder as she poured coffee. "Luis?" Ray nodded. "First day in the new position," she smiled. "You two are an unlikely pair, that's for sure." Ray couldn't disagree. Sometimes he still marveled at how life had thrown them together, first as adversaries, then as reluctant acquaintances, and now as something close to friends. It wasn't perfect. Occasionally, during their conversations, Ray would remember the humiliation of that traffic stop, the casual cruelty Luis had shown him. But those moments were growing rarer, overshadowed by newer, better memories. The construction site was busy that day. Ray's crew was rushing to finish a commercial building before the summer rains began. He was checking measurements for a support beam when his phone rang. Luis's number flashed on the screen. "How's it going?" Ray answered, stepping away from the noise. "Better than I expected," Luis replied, his voice energized. "Just finished a presentation at the high school. The kids actually listened. Some even stayed after to ask questions." Ray could hear the pride in Luis's voice. "What did you talk about?" "Police-community relations. How both sides need to work on trust." Luis paused. "I told them about you." Ray hadn't expected that. "Me? Why?" "Because you're the reason I'm doing this." Luis's voice grew serious. "I told them how I treated you unfairly, how you saved my life anyway, and how it changed my perspective. Didn't use your name, of course." Ray leaned against a stack of lumber, unsure how to respond. He had never thought of himself as someone's inspiration, especially not for a police officer. "Anyway," Luis continued when Ray remained silent, "I wanted to ask if you'd consider being part of this, coming to speak with me sometimes. Your perspective would be valuable." "I don't know, Luis, I'm not great with public speaking. Just think about it. No pressure." After they hung up, Ray returned to work, but Luis's request lingered in his mind. The idea of standing in front of people, sharing his story, it made his palms sweat. But there was something compelling about it too. The possibility of turning that negative experience into something positive, something that might help prevent similar situations for others. That evening, as Ray drove home, he passed the gas station where everything had changed. He rarely stopped there anymore, too many memories, but today, on impulse, he pulled in. The place looked exactly the same. Same flickering fluorescent lights. Same coffee counter where Luis had dropped his cup. Same spot in the parking lot where Ray had performed CPR while waiting for the ambulance. Ray sat in his truck, remembering. In those frantic moments, kneeling on the rough asphalt, he hadn't been thinking about fairness or justice or grudges. He had simply seen another human being in desperate need and acted. It was perhaps the purest moment of his life, uncomplicated by the messiness of normal human interaction. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Luis. "By the way, my boys are asking when your daughter can come over again. Apparently dinosaurs are now totally cool thanks to her." Ray smiled and typed back, "This weekend maybe?" I need to talk to you about that speaking thing. The response came immediately. You'll do it? Maybe. Let me think about it more. 2 weeks later, Ray found himself standing in a community center meeting room, facing a group of police cadets and civilian community members. His hands were clammy, his mouth dry. Luis stood beside him, calm and professional in his uniform. This is my friend Ray, Luis was saying. He's going to share a perspective that I think is important for all of us to hear. Friend. The word still caught Ray by surprise sometimes. He cleared his throat and began telling his story. Not just the heart attack and the rescue, but the traffic stop too. The unfairness of it, the helplessness he had felt, the anger. The room was silent as he spoke. He could see the discomfort on some of the officers' faces, the recognition on others. When he described performing CPR in the parking lot, a few people leaned forward in their seats, fully engaged. I didn't think about who he was in that moment, Ray concluded, or what he'd done earlier. He was just a person who needed help. And maybe that's something we all need to remember more often. That beneath our jobs and our roles and our mistakes, we're all just people trying to get through each day. After the presentation, several cadets approached Ray with questions, or simply to thank him for sharing his experience. An older officer shook his hand firmly and said, "We need to hear stories like yours. Keeps us honest." On the drive home, Luis was quiet, his usual confidence subdued. You okay? Ray asked. Luis nodded slowly. Just thinking about what you said, about seeing the person beneath everything else. He stared out the window for a moment. You know, I've been trying to figure out why I was so hard on you that day. The truth is, my marriage was falling apart. My blood pressure was through the roof, and I was taking it out on whoever crossed my path. I figured it was something like that, Ray said. We've all had bad days. Not bad enough to justify what I did. Luis turned to look at Ray directly. The thing is, if our situations had been reversed, if you had harassed me unfairly and then I saw you having a heart attack, I don't know if I would have helped you. The admission hung in the air between them. Raw and honest, you would have, Ray said finally. Maybe you don't think so, but I know you would have. Luis shook his head. The man I was then? I'm not so sure. He paused. The man I am now? Yes, absolutely. And that's because of you. They arrived at Ray's house, where both their families were gathering for a cookout. As they stepped out of the car, the front door burst open and 3 children raced out. Ray's daughter and Luis's 2 sons laughing as they chased each other across the lawn. Dad. Luis's older boy called out. Can we show her the new telescope after dinner? There's supposed to be a meteor shower tonight. Sure thing, Luis called back with a smile. He turned to Ray. Thanks for doing this today. I know it wasn't easy, Ray shrugged. Figured if you can change, so can I. That night, after dinner had been eaten and dishes cleared away, the 2 families gathered in Ray's backyard. The telescope was set up, and the children took turns looking at the stars, exclaiming over each tiny flash of light streaking across the sky. Ray and Luis sat on the porch steps, watching their families interact with an ease that would have seemed impossible just 6 months ago. My sergeant says they want to expand the community program, Luis said quietly. More presentations, more dialogue sessions. They're asking me to head it up. That's great, Ray replied. You're good at it. I want you involved, officially. We could make it a regular thing, a cop and a civilian sharing their perspectives, showing that conversation is possible. Ray considered this. It wasn't a path he had ever imagined for himself. He was a construction worker, not a public speaker. But something about the idea resonated with him. I'll think about it, he said. Above them, a particularly bright meteor streaked across the sky, drawing gasps from the children. Ray's daughter turned to them, her face alight with excitement. Dad! Luis, did you see that one? It was huge. We saw it, Ray called back with a smile. Luis leaned back on his elbows, looking up at the vast expanse of stars. Sometimes I think about how close I came to missing all this, he said softly. My kids growing up. This new job, everything. Ray nodded, understanding completely. Life's strange that way. One moment can change everything. One person can change everything, Luis corrected him. He held out his hand. Thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for showing me a better way to live it. Ray took the offered hand, remembering the first time they had shaken hands, awkwardly, in a hospital room, with the weight of their history hanging between them. So much had changed since then. As they sat together under the stars, watching their families united in wonder at the night sky, Ray thought about the long, complicated journey that had brought them to this point. From strangers to adversaries to reluctant acquaintances to something approaching friendship, it hadn't been easy. There had been uncomfortable conversations, lingering resentments, moments of doubt. But sitting here now, Ray knew they had built something valuable from the ruins of that terrible day. A bridge of understanding that neither of them had expected to find. Sometimes, Ray realized, the most important connections in life come from the most unlikely beginnings. And sometimes, in our darkest moments, we find the light that guides us forward, not in spite of our differences, but because of the humanity that lies beneath them.